Hello everybody, welcome to this video that I'm recording as a tribute to Dad. Let me pop up here on the screen, kind of a thumbnail that I got here. Tribute to Dad, faithful until the end, absolutely true. His name was Elvin. Many of you know him by Elvin, but probably most of you know him by Al. And in case you're watching it on a cell phone or something and it's very small, it says, a wonderful husband and father and faithful Baptist missionary for 42 years. That was the Baptist missionary part. He was older than that. And then Matthew 25:23, well done, good and faithful servant. So let me see, I'm going to keep that up there, but let me just minimize it off to the left here. There we go. It's prettier than maybe than that pillow anyway. Okay, so the other day, and I don't have the best weather situation going on here, as you can maybe tell in the reflection off the glass. Sometimes it gets very breezy, and then at other times it's quiet. I'm just gonna do it. I'm just chatting. I'm chatting at the laptop, chatting at you, whoever you are who are listening to this. And I did basically the same thing the other day in Spanish for all of the Spanish speaking people who were influenced by my dad's ministry, my parents' ministry. And so this is a tribute to Dad, focusing on Dad, but of course, as the picture there shows, Dad was Dad because Mom was there as well. And sorry about all the wind that just kicked in. Hopefully this little feathery thing here will keep the sound okay, and hopefully that wind chime won't mess too much up. So anyway, just wanted to chat for a while. I don't know how long it'll be, maybe an hour, I don't know, about Dad. For those who don't know, maybe the background, and maybe some do, I'm not sure. So I'm going to try and cover generally the basis for Dad's kind of biography. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always write me. I am right now in Snoqualmie. Behind me is the apartment that my brother Stephen built for my parents to be able to retire in. And it's a beautiful little apartment made just for them, and has been an excellent place for them over the past 10, almost 11 years. And so I'm on the porch now, and right in front of me there are 1,000 plants and flowers that Mom babies through their life cycle, and she can tell you about every one of them. They're gorgeous. And there's hummingbirds coming and going even as I'm speaking here to the little feeder. And it's a cool day. It's cloudy, in the low 50s. And it is 6 days after Dad passed away last Thursday on May the 7th. And so we're looking at a memorial service in 3 days on Saturday the 16th. Some of you will see this before then, and you can definitely, if you're interested, see it, watch it live streamed. We'll be sending out all of that information, and if not, later on as well. We don't expect many people at all. This is very far out of the way. His influence, his ministries were in Spain for 40 plus years, and then in Greenville, South Carolina for most of the other years. And well, I'll give a little bit more of the bio now, but so they do have friends, and they have a church, great church that they go to, or Dad went to, or members of. And I might say a little bit more about that later. Hopefully I won't forget, because I have a list here to look at, a cheat sheet, but it's not perfect either. And for it to work, I have to look at it, so that can be a problem. Okay, Dad was born in 1938, April 5th, 1938, I didn't write that down. I asked Mom. Might have been River Hills, right outside of Winnipeg, if not Winnipeg, outside of Winnipeg, Manitoba in Canada. And he is the grandson, which makes me the great-grandson, of Emil Bonikowsky. And Emil Bonikowsky was a German Baptist itinerant pastor preacher in Siberia, Russia, Poland, and some of those other countries that some of them have ceased to exist. He always pastored German churches because they were all German, and at one point in his life he pastored 5 churches at once, and he would do a route. This is way there in eastern Germany, south of Russia, and would go 1 month at a time. He would rotate between these churches, and when he got there, they would have their baptisms and their marriages. I don't think the deaths were timed, but everything else that could be was timed for when he was there. And so that was Emil Bonikowsky. He had a pile of sons. I want to say 16 children, but anyway, a bunch. And a lot of them were in the ministry. And his grandson, of course, my dad, was born there, and that was 1938. In 1961, he married my mom, Helga Benke. They had grown up together there in what is River Hills. Man, I got another bunch of wind here. Another, it's a I don't know, what is it, 30 to 40 minutes outside of Winnipeg, I think. And just a tiny little community right along the river. And I've been there a good number of times through the years. Beautiful place. But they grew up there. Dad was older than Mom. I think he's 5 or 6 years older. And so they weren't necessarily in the youth group together, but they knew each other anyway. They got married. My mom was 18 years old. And in 62, I was born. So that was 63 years ago. And right after I was born, the year after I was born, man, I'm tempted to take that thing down. Dad was transferred from Canada by his boss to Georgia, to the southeast. And he went down there and was a very successful businessman in Georgia. And right after we got there, I think it was, that my other brother was born, Mark, who's about a year and a little bit younger than I am. And so they were in Georgia, had a brand new home, had a great job. He was manager, and just, it was going like a house on fire. And the Lord revived something that had been in his heart years back, and through a series of visiting preachers and so forth, God called him into foreign missions. And so Dad thought the Lord wanted him in Colombia, South America. And that's what he set his sights on being, was a missionary to Colombia. He went up to Greenville to study at the university, and was there for 3 years to finish his BA. While he's there, and before he could get to Colombia, I guess, the Lord changed everything, and Spain opened up to missionaries, had opened up a few years before, while he was in college, basically. And so in 1972, Dad and Mom, me and my brother Mark, left for Spain. I was 9 years old. We landed in Madrid, and were there for a year while Dad did some language studies. I have very few memories from that time, but a few. I won't take up the time now to mention them, but life is interesting. But then we ended up going up to the Basque Country, which is in northern Spain, in the mountains, up against right of the border with France. And because someone had told them that was a very difficult place to not go there because they were very hard to reach, Dad said, okay, I think that's where God wants us. And so we went up to the Basque country in 1973. Right after we got there, and since I don't know how much racket that thing is making, I am going to take it down. So hang on, I'm not going to edit or anything, just going to take this thing down. There, that was the last sound it made for a little while. Okay, so then in 1973, 1973 is when my youngest brother was born, Stephen. There's a hummingbird there. Wish I could show it to you, but too much hassle. And he was born, so that there were 3 boys then, me, Mark, and Stephen. Well, Dad there were a few believers there from another missionary who had done some work, and so we started Bible studies with a few believers, 3 or 4, I think 4, 3 or 4, and so Dad started Bible studies with him, and then we began to have services in our apartment in a little town called Fuenterrabía. Today, the Basque term is Hondarribia, and that's where we lived for the first term, 4 years, and the church started in our living room. And I remember I was a young teenager, and Dad basically decided that the best thing to do to get the gospel out was to use gospel literature. And so he had tracts, and he went out and he blanketed the entire area. Irun was a town, I don't know how many were there then, but it's a big, it's one of the bigger cities of our province, which isn't very big, but it is one of the bigger cities now, and it probably had back then, maybe, I'm going to guesstimate 30,000, maybe 35,000. There's a valley, a couple of other towns. And he started blanketing with gospel literature. And the Lord started building a tiny little church that slowly, by the end of our first furlough, they had a building. They had bought a little piece of a building, a storefront, what you would call a storefront. And Dad applied his construction skills and just prepared the thing and turned it into a little church. Later on, they started adding, and today that church, thriving ministry, has most of the building. They have bought the bottom section of the building. But anyway, so that was in the early 70s, and started having services there. Of course, I grew up in the youth group. I was in the youth group, but also the leader of the youth group, because that's just what we did. We were all in the ministry, though of course Dad was the church planner and he was the preacher, and so that is how the ministry started there in northern Spain. Also, there were very few ministries in Spain back there, very few missionaries, independent Baptist churches. There just weren't. It had just opened up, and so there were a handful, and we knew everybody knew each other. Let me tilt this a little bit. Everybody knew each other, and so another missionary ministry just to the south of us, a couple of hours. Back then it would have been almost three and a half hours, were the Allens, and several missionary families with them. Later on, the Allen daughters, one of the twins, it would be my wife, Mimi. So she grew up just not too far from us. Later on, they went down to the south and started a ministry down on the Mediterranean coast. But anyway, so we were in Spain at the same time. Very few missionaries there, and the few of us that there are there. And Spain is a pretty big country. It's about the size of Texas, so it's a fairly large place. And the missionaries were very scattered. You know, we saw each other once, twice a year, 3 at the most. Everybody was in their corner doing the work. You know. So let me see. One thing that happened in 1978, I believe it was, 1978. I remember just that it happened. I don't remember any facts about it, but Dad helped me prepare my first message. I was 16 years old. I'm pretty sure it was on the temptation of Christ. And he helped me do the message, and then he encouraged me and showed me how to, coached me through preaching it in our little church there. So that was the first time I ever preached, and that was my goodness, how many years ago was that? Like 47 years ago, maybe, I think, something like that. And so he is the one who introduced me, I guess, into preaching. He was a very good preacher, by the way. There are many kinds or styles of preaching, and the different preachers have different strengths. And so I always remember Dad with this particular strength. Like I say, he was a good preacher. His messages at camp, he rarely moved. In other words, he was there at the ministry. He wasn't one to go off preaching everywhere, and no, he was a kind of a homebody. He was always there. But when he did go out and preached, they were memorable messages, and I, to this day, whenever I meet people who are from that old period, they will tell me about messages that Dad preached here and there. So, oh, and I was going to say his forte, and I was always, I haven't heard him preach almost nothing in 35 years, because I've been in my own ministry, but I remember that when he would preach, one of his characteristic style factors or items was he was excellent at finding illustrations that nailed it. They hit the hammer. They hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. He would start his messages with an illustration that just, whoa, opened up your heart and opened up the theme. And then he would finish his messages again with another one that would just, like a judge's gavel, that was finished and well done. And so that was one thing I always remember about his preaching. But anyway, he was a good preacher, and he started me. And I am not that kind of illustrator, but he was. So I was in 1978. In 1980, I went on to college after a year of kind of a pause year. Stayed back a year from when I normally would have gone, and was in the ministry, fully involved in the ministry, carried the youth group, was in music, and we were all involved in the ministry, but it was a kind of a preparation for me. So went off to the college, to university, and got an undergrad and then a grad degree. Mimi and I were married in 85. Our son David was born in 87, and we came back to Spain, or went back to Spain, in 89. We landed right before Danny was born, and Dad is still there, plugging away, preaching, doing all the preaching. Had a Bible Institute for the church. Had a little Christian school, youth activities, you name it. He was just steadily. That was Dad. He was always wherever he should be. Even years later, and nobody else might come, but Dad was there. If Dad was supposed to be there, he was there. And I'll mention maybe a little bit more about that in a minute with the farmhouse. So during that time, he even got a couple of honorary doctorates. Never tells anybody about it. I've never heard him say anything about them. Not that he doesn't appreciate them, but that's just, Dad was not a show person at all. He was just not a spectacular, dynamic person. He was just I guess you could say, a plotter, a faithful, godly, quiet example in everything that he understood to be God's will. And everything he did it well, and he finished. Well, so we've been going through his stuff the last 6 days. I've been going with Mom to deliver things that we don't need, or to be returned, or just gotten rid of, and just going through all kinds of things. The other day, Mom found his wallet, and so she opened it up. The two of us are looking at it as she opens the wallet and pulling out interesting little things, pictures and things that he had in there, and she found this little piece of paper that was, folded up, tiny, fit in his wallet. never seen it before. Of course, I sure hadn't. And what it is, it's a little printed list of dates of years and highlights from those years, things that for him were important. And I guess he didn't want to forget them, or he just wanted a quick way to know what year what had happened, you know. And so poignant, so interesting. But it starts with 2007. So before I get to that, in the year 2000, God gave us the Ayeri farmhouse. If you've been following our ministry, if you know my parents or our ministries, you know all about the Ayeri farmhouse. It's a 300-plus-year-old Basque farmhouse in the mountains. We have used it for years and years now for all kinds of ministry. And back then, it was just a prayer. We had no idea. There is a story written about it. It's called the Ayeri Miracle. Ask me about it or go online on Amazon. You can find it there. Ayeri is spelled Aierdi, and that will tell you the story, the amazing story of how God gave us this farmhouse with all the land that goes around it. Now, it even says why we looked for it, what we were planning on doing with it. None of that happened. The Lord has his own way of, doing his will. His will is his will, and we think we know what it is, and we find out later we didn't have any idea what it was. But anyway, that's a different story. But Dad had told us when we were praying for a farmhouse, he said, if you find a farmhouse, I will help you rebuild it or, adapt it into a conference center, camp place or whatever, a retreat center and so forth. So because he said that, then we were confident that we could go ahead and get some old place that was unusable. And in this case, it was a rock building house, over 3 centuries old, and it needed to be completely gutted, completely from the roof to the ground. It had no floor. I mean, it had a floor. It was just the ground. And anyway, I don't want to get into all of that. But so he began in the year 2000 when God gave us this place. He started coming out to work 3 days a week. Now, he's pastoring the church. He had let it go for a time under a young pastor, but that didn't work out. He had to go back and take it again for the remaining years of his ministry. So he is an hour away up on the coast, and he is just up to here with ministry in the little church. But he came out Monday, I think it was Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. He would come out in the morning, and he would work at the farmhouse. And he was always there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And the other days, of course, were ministry for the Irun church. But he would come out and he would work. He would, towards the end, when he after a while, he started coming 2 days a week. And finally, in the latter years, he was coming once a week. But he would come. He was in his 70s, and he'd be up on a scaffolding somewhere. And I would get there. And if it was Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, and I got up to the farmhouse, I knew he was going to be there. I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to wonder if it was those days and there wasn't something, special going on. He was there working whether anybody was there or not to help him. And so that went through all the way through until they left, which was in 2015. So the farmhouse ministry and the rebuilding of the place was very heavy in those first years. And in fact, the way God had it designed to happen, not just Dad, one person and us, would have been impossible to ever finish. But God began to bring mission teams, and we had dozens and dozens of mission teams, and up to this date, we've had over 75 mission teams come. And the early years, all of them came for work. They worked on the farmhouse, whether it was concrete, part carpentry, plumbing, masonry, you name it, or people didn't know how to do anything but could, do something, while others who knew worked away. And so it went through the years. And Dad was the one who coordinated all of that. And when a mission team came, if we had a group of 11 guys just hung chung to build some floors or some beds or whatever, when they got there, everything was there. The supplies were there, the tools were there, everything that was needed was all in place because Dad had it set up. So that was, you know, what he did on a lot of what he did there in those 2000s to 2015. Okay, so let me show you a little bit or read a little bit about what's on this little paper. Oh, I forgot. I have more pictures. I meant to put these up. Let me see. There's Mom and Dad. Same pictures down at the bottom. And then this was a picture I took just a few days before he passed. I came in from running and got by him there and said, Dad, let me get a picture with you. And so we got that picture, a special picture for me. And yeah, so anyway, let's see. So this thing starts at 2007. First thing on here is a hip replacement and prostate cancer. And then he has trips to Canary Islands. In the 2010, he went to Israel. His brother dies in 2010. In 2011, this is 11 years into the farmhouse ministry, he fell off of a scaffolding. Crazy story, but anyway. He fell on his back, probably on a hillside, probably a distance of about maybe 10 feet, 10 feet. And this was on a barn. They were redoing the roof. Well, we were redoing the roof. I wasn't there when it happened. And on the roof, the old tiles, the terracotta tiles, used to be kept down on the edges because we had a lot of wind like this, kept down with big limestone rocks that lined the entire roof all the way around. And we had thrown off those because we took all the tile off and all that. Well, a lot of those rocks we had dumped on that hill, just dropped them off on the hill from the top. The day before he fell, Mom and my wife, Mimi, had cleared that hill of those rocks. We're talking big rocks size of your head or a bucket, something like that. They were big rocks. Had they been there, he could never have survived that fall. So the Lord was in that, even though from that day on he had problems with his back, serious problems, and he had surgeries and whatever, but it slowed him down. Didn't knock him out, but it definitely slowed him down. So, and then he had MRI on his spine in 2014. In 2014, they retired from Spain after 42 years. Okay, from 72 to 14. They retired from Spain, and in 2015, they drove a fifth wheel from South Carolina all the way up here to Washington State, where my brother, Stephen, who had been born the year after right as we got up to the Basque Country, he was up here, worked for Microsoft, had a good job, a nice house, and behind the garage, they put their fifth wheel. They lived in it for a few years, and it was so hard for Dad to get around, but he was crawling up and in and out of that thing. And finally, my brother went ahead and built them this beautiful apartment, and I'm very grateful to Stephen and his family for that, because it gave Mom and Dad a beautiful place to retire, very comfortable for them, and yeah. So anyway, so they come in 2015. He has here an interesting date, 2015. Now Dad is very independent Baptist. That's what he is. I mean, that's what his grandfather was, and very strong, and I am too. But I mean, Dad has it in his blood from the head to toes. And so when they came, he was going to find himself an independent Baptist church, and so he did. He says on September 13th of 2015, he gives the actual. Most of them just have like a year date or something, or a lot of them do. But this one has September 13th, started attending Foundation. Now that means Foundation Baptist Church. And then he has another entry. There aren't that many entries on here, but this is significant enough for him to put it down. On November 8th, 2015, they joined Foundation Baptist Church. And so that's where they've been going all of these years, about 11 years now. And Matt Farinella is the pastor here, and it's a small church, But a wonderful church. They were very happy. Well, Mom still is, and Matt has been his pastor. And Matt has, every single time I see him, almost, he just reiterates how much he appreciated Dad and Mom for their investment, their influence. Even though he wanted to be in the background, but he could fill in for anything at any time. That was Dad. Oh, then he goes, I'm just going to, it has a lot of physical things, because Dad had, in the latter part of his life, he had all kinds of physical issues. He had pulmonary embolism. That was like an open heart surgery. And this is 2017, 2020, a spine operation. Oh, he said canceled due to a strike. Had the spine operation in February 2020. 2024, he has an eye biopsy. They find lymphoma behind his left eye. This is all 2024. September, goes to the eye clinic. He has his first chemo in September because of the cancerous tumor. More checkups. Then he makes this note on October 12th of 2024. Okay, October 12th, 2024. He says, couldn't finish my walk around Tollgate Park. That's what he writes here. Well, it's raining today, but yesterday, and whenever it's not raining, then I'll go with Mom and her two dogs, and we'll go to Tollgate Park, which is about 2 miles maybe from here. 2-3 miles, and it's just a nice park. Has a little farm in the middle of it, and you can walk around it, and a lot of people go there to walk their dogs or to run or to bike, or not biking, but walking or running. And it's just a wonderful little park, beautiful, and there's a play park where people bring there and have meals and so forth, and it's right at a mile to do the whole circle. And he said, I couldn't finish my walk around Tollgate Park. Whether it was his different neck, his fall, or his neck surgeries that he had, they're not exactly sure, but the whole right side began to get numb, and he was having a hard time walking. This was the last couple of years of his life. And I mean, Dad was very active always, but this was really hindering him. And so he makes that note on the 18th, which is 6 days later. He said, walk the short route without problem. So he's trying his best to stay active, and there was a shortcut in that loop, and he was able to do the shortcut. He did that a lot of times. He would go with a cane, and oh my. So every time I came, every year I would come in May for a couple of weeks, and we would go walking. I would go up the mountain to the pass, and we would have breakfast at the Pass restaurant. We would go to the golf course restaurant and eat there, and we just had a bunch of traditions, which this year when I came couldn't happen. But these are just some notes. He had some more chemo on October 21st, and then he mentions that in 2024, he doesn't put the date. Oh yeah, October 25th, his brother died. This was his second brother. There were 4 of them. And this was the other youngest brother. Well, they're all younger than him, but I'd say the youngest and the second to youngest, okay, had died in his sleep. This was in 2024. In 2025, February, which is just over a year ago, he says last radiation therapy, did more radiation, I think for the tumor in his neck, because he had one in his neck, then he had one in the eye and the neck, came back and whatnot. So, and then the last entry he has is 2025. He doesn't have a date for it. Luis, his youngest brother's wife, passed away. Luis. And that's it. And the issue is that his right hand began to go numb. And he basically lost the use of it sometime last year. And he was always on his laptop checking all kinds of things and listening to podcasts and following. He loved prophecy. That was his thing. He loved to listen to prophecy preachers and books and read and study. And he had preached through Revelation, the book of Revelation, I don't know how many times throughout his ministry. He loved it. And in fact, last week before he passed away, the days before, I would put on a Bible audio, and the first one he asked for was, I said, what would you want? Revelation, the book of Revelation. So I put the book of Revelation. He listened to the book of Revelation, the entire thing at once, at one sitting, one lying, I guess. So anyway, why was I saying that? Okay, so he didn't put in any more entries, probably because he couldn't type anymore. He just completely quit on the laptop because he couldn't. He had to learn to eat with his left hand and all of that. So last November 2025, we were able to convince him and Mom to fly to Greenville, South Carolina, the first time that Dad had been back in 11 years. There's so many friends there that wanted to meet him, family members, his great-grandchildren are there, some of them, and some of them, and they had never met him, and so they came for just a few days, but they were precious, wonderful, wonderful days. And he and Mom stayed at Dad Allen's place, and we just had it was a tidbit of heaven for those days there. And we didn't know that after that he would really nosedive come first of the year. So let me see. So their visit. So I don't remember when it was, but probably February, 2 months ago. I probably did write it down. Come to think of it, it's probably in my journal. But I remember the day when I was talking to Mom, and Dad, and Mom said, "Dad has lost his appetite." And I've always understood, thought, and said, when someone loses their appetite, that's not a good sign. And so, sure enough, I mean, he had lost his appetite. And she would feed him and give him food and so forth, and he'd eat it. But he always had a good appetite. Dad could put it away. And so, my goodness, when I heard that, I said, "Oh no, that doesn't sound good at all." And he just went downhill. He had a UTI, had a bladder infection. They caught it. Not in time. Mom didn't realize how serious that was. Nobody had told her that is what many times happens, especially in men as they get older, that those things are lethal if they're not taken care of. And so, I had requirements and ministry obligations in April, even up till the last days of April, and I thought, man, if I could finish with these, then I would come. And in the end, I had to, just take off, drop whatever I had, the seminary course I was going to be teaching and so forth, and just dropped it and came on the 22nd or 23rd. I got here of April, and of course, Dad was, he was in bed. I would help get him out. Of course, all of this time, my brothers are helping. Stephen lives right next door. Mark would come quite often, and they would help. But now I was able to come and be, because Stephen, he's working. And so even though he got permission to work right next door in an office here at the house, but it wasn't the same. He's busy. He's working, meetings and online stuff. So I was able to come and then just spend the entire time here with Dad and Mom and help Dad every time was needed for anything that was needed. And so the days went by, and then he really nosedived last Tuesday, and we realized, you know what, and the hospice started coming, which they were excellent. They were excellent professionals, very friendly, very helpful, informative. They explained things and brought materials, and it was a very good experience. And one of the things that Dad would tell me in the years, how long is this going? Okay, not too bad. In the years that I had been visiting, every year I would come, he'd say, I don't mind, I don't fear death in going to be with the Lord, he said, but I sure don't look forward to getting sick and dying, just going out with a sickness like that. And he was talking, I'm gathering, I understood it to mean, many people do. They have cancer or some debilitating disease, and they go out and they're having to take all kinds of painkillers and whatnot. And he said, that's what I don't look forward to. Well, who does? I understand that, but that's what he would say. Well, as I got here and saw the situation, I thought, you know what? God is giving him his unspoken desire. Because I would ask him every day, I said, Dad, does anything hurt? No. Are you sure? No, nothing hurts. Every once in a while he had a little bit of maybe indigestion or something, especially towards the end when his organs were starting to fail, and he would have some unpleasantness and so forth. But even the last morning, and I couldn't get a clear answer from him, but I said, does anything hurt? And the indication was no. There was no pain on his face. There was, and the day before, and every time I'd asked him, there was no pain. And so I thought, wow, that's very nice of God, very kind of God to do that. A number of things the Lord allowed us in those days that I had with him before he went on. The Lord allowed us to have some very, very fun times too. You wouldn't think so, because it wasn't like we could have long, wonderful conversations like I did every other year, where we would talk by the hour. No, couldn't do that, because his mind was coming and going. He was confused between medicines and the infection. So anytime we would ask him something, he would respond, and he could remember things. He might forget something, but he could respond coherently, and we would have a little conversation. But whenever he started something, it was like, Dad, what are you saying? I can't understand you. And some of the most frustrating times for him were, he was telling me I needed to do something for him. And I couldn't, for the life of me, I could not understand what he wanted me to do. It was incoherent. And he would see things that I couldn't see. They weren't in the room. At least they weren't materially in the room. And I'd say, where is that? I'll get it for you. Where is it? It's right there. And he would point, and I'm saying, Dad, there's nothing there except a book and this. So you want this? You want that? You want this? No. And so he was in and out confused. And he would tell me to get the two plates. One of them goes onto the ground, one goes over the ground. Where are they? They're over there. I said, well, that's a garage. You want me to go take you there so you can show me? And he would say, yeah, but he couldn't walk. When I got here, I would hold him and basically carry his weight, and he would shuffle his feet slowly, and every day it was less. But we would move him back and forth from the couch to the bed and so forth. And by the time I said, okay, well, let's get some more clothes on, and I'll take you. By that time, he might have forgotten it, and then we would go on. But he would be so frustrated. And so one time he said, I said, Dad, I'm sorry. What do you want me to do? He said, go. Go. And I said, go. Where do you want me to go? He said, in the corner. He wanted me to go in the corner. It was so funny. He was even smiling at it. By that time, he was so frustrated because we couldn't help him out. Well, one thing, and there were a number of humorous things where Mom and I were looking at each other. We were just dying laughing, and he would smile too. So this happened right before I got there. Okay, so the hospice workers are coming. They started coming after I got here and so forth. But then other social workers and so forth had come a few times. Somehow, somebody, because Mom had insisted on him coming home from the hospital, because Dad did not like the hospital. He didn't like anybody at the hospital because they made him do things he didn't want to do. And so he did not want to stay at the hospital. So they brought him home. And they got the bed and everything for him. And so somewhere somebody got the idea that, that Mom had brought him home and he was being miscared for and so forth. And Mom is like echando chispas, we say in Spanish. Who is how do you say that? Spitting out sparks, Because, what do you mean I'm not caring for him? I care for him a lot better than you do. The idea was that she's taken excellent care of him 24/7. Well, so they send someone, some guy, and he comes in, and Mom's saying, who are you? Why are you? You have authority to be here? Well, I'm just checking and whatnot. Anyway, this guy was supposedly going to try and figure out his exact conditions or something like that, and if he was being cared for. So this guy comes and he says, he wants to do can I do a cognitive test on Dad, or so Dad doesn't want to have anything to do with him at this point, but so he reads this story, this paragraph, like you would read a child a story with little, just descriptive things in it, and then he said, well, now I want to ask you some questions, and he was trying to see if he could remember what he had just read him in that story. Dad doesn't want to have anything to do with it, but anyway, he asks the first question, and I wasn't here, so I don't know the questions. I don't know if Mom remembers or not, but so Dad answers the first question. Dad's in his bed. Of course, he's got this fancy bed, and he's leaned up a bit, or maybe he was in the chair. Dad answers the first question. The guy said, okay. He asks him a second question. Dad answers the second question. And then the third question, and Dad has slumped over, and he's asleep. And the guy, repeats the question and looks over at Mom, I guess. And Mom says, he does that. He's very sleepy, and sometimes, just mid-conversation, he'll just sleep. And so the guy, fiddles around, and finally, there's nothing he can do. He's sleeping. So he picks up his stuff and leaves. And so Mom, accompanies him to the door, shuts the door, turns around, looks at Dad and says, you weren't asleep, were you? Dad opens his eyes and grins, and that's all he did. And so we died laughing when she told us that. So there were these times that it was just humorous, and the Lord allowed us to do that in those final days, and it was a precious thing. And Dad did not lose his humor. After that, Mom would tell me some of the things he used to do. I'd never heard of them. I wish I could tell some of those someday. Some of his humor that he would use on Mom. Maybe if she was a little upset at him or something. He was good at it, apparently. So, okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. I can't think of anything else at this point. There's so many other things I could say. I do want to again say thank you to my brothers, especially Stephen, he and his wife Kay. They have just been there for Mom and Dad in every possible way, given them a great place to retire. Their reasoning, in part of their reasoning was that when we were on the mission field, our 4 children, who are now all married and have children, our 4 children every week they spent time with Oma and Opa. We would go there, spend the night, and they would be with Opa, and Opa would take them, and and Oma, of course, her cooking, that was like Disney World every day to go to their Oma and Opas. By the way, that's a German for Grandma and Grandpa. And so they got that as they were growing up. It was the richest kind of childhood, and even on into their teenage years, that you could ever ask for. Would be that they could spend time with their grandparents, and Mom and Dad were so wise in how they influenced our children. They were not dictatorial. They were not sticking their noses in. No. They were wise in every single way they did it. And the kids in these days before Dad went on, and since then, they've sent videos and audios and pictures, and they've put up tributes on Facebook and different places, saying, for the most part, he was like almost the most influential person in our lives, Dad, as their Opa, and their Oma, of course, is still with us. But so I don't know why I got on that, but because Stephen has 3 children, and he said, Andy and Mimi's kids have had your input all of these years. Why don't you retire, not in Greenville, but retire out here in the Northwest, so that our children can know you as well. So that was part of the reasoning, and of course, they've just been a huge blessing. And Mark, of course, my other brother, lives close by, and he drops in quite a bit as well and helps. And he's also just what can I say? The Lord has been very, very good to our family, very kind to us, and so. What I thought of is, as Dad, Stephen and I were the closest right there when Dad passed, and we're touching to see if all of a sudden, whoa, I don't think he's breathing. It was that quiet. It was that none of us realized what had happened, because we knew he was in the last days, but we didn't know he was in the last minutes that morning of last Thursday. And so Stephen and I are there. Stephen's on the one side trying to find a pulse, and I'm up on the front trying to see if there's any movement, any eye movement, any breathing, there was we caught a tiny bit of movement in the throat, which ended up probably being just reflexes or something, and we both said, he's gone. It was so peaceful, so quiet, no pain on his face or in his expression, nothing. He just slept. And I remembered that, as far as I can tell, it's my opinion, I'm not the only one, I'm guessing, but what I think is true in the earlier parts of history, in the Old Testament, in the Pentateuch area, the time of the patriarchs, Pentateuch time, and when Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, it seems like, for the most part, death was getting older, tireder, sleepier, and falling asleep. That was the norm. Obviously, Abel, others, if there was, violence or some other circumstances, no, battles and so forth. But the normal way to die seemed to be, you got old, however hundreds of years old or however old you got, as the time came, the years came down lower into Abraham and Isaac and Jacob's time, and even Joseph's, they just seemed to fall asleep. And then in the New Testament, of course, you have Stephen, whose death was violent because he was stoned, but the scriptures say, and he fell asleep, and he slept. And Jacob, I don't know where it is, but he gathered up his feet under the bed, and he yielded up the ghost. He just let it go. And so that is the way we saw Dad pass into eternity and into the Lord's presence last Thursday. He slept and awoke in the Savior's presence. And what can we say except that was a precious thing to witness and to understand, and we're so grateful to God for that. So grateful. And so one of the things that we're going through all of Dad's belongings, and this shirt I'm going to take from Dad, and there's all kinds of things. I don't have enough room in the suitcases because I'll be going back to Spain soon, and I got a June full of ministry, and I've got to get back. But I'm doing as much as I can with Mom these days, filling them as much as possible with good memories and good times together. But we're going through Dad's things, and so we came across his Bible. This is his English Bible. We have a Spanish preaching Bible as well, and I sort of hope, sort of plan to take this. I haven't heard anything from my brothers as to their interests, but it's all marked up. This is way back. I mean, he's got notes from the 70s, so this thing is it's at least 50 years old. Just gobs of writing. It's his writing, which is like mine, illegible. But I thought I would. There's nothing, fancy about the Bible. It's very, very, very worn. You can see that, as your Bibles probably are too, and mine. My regular reading Bible, I just use it in the mornings initially to read. I don't use it for anything else because it's just falling apart. Nothing wrong with that. But I thought I would use Dad's Bible to read a verse in Matthew. Matthew chapter 25. You can think of what it might be. 25, 23. Okay, it's right there. It's all, whoops, trying to get it right into the camera there. The Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. And Dad would say that, just a few things. He wasn't all over the map. He was in his little corner, being faithful. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. What a beautiful passage. What a beautiful truth. So much significance in this parable. And it came true. Last Thursday again, along with countless servants of God who have been faithful to the calling God gave them, grateful to their Lord for all of the blessings, and faithful to the end. And so that's the way I want to leave it. I'm just going to pop that up there again, that title. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or any comments or anything. Oh yeah, we will have the memorial service on Saturday. I'm recording this on Wednesday, so we hope to live stream it. If you see this and don't have connection with us through WhatsApp or email or something, then ask and I can get that to you. So I'm going to just end that way and thank the Lord for my dad and my mom. Dad has moved on, and he was faithful until the end.